Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Have you ever felt like no matter how high the ceiling of opportunity is raised, the entire game still feels, well, rigged?
Today, we are undertaking a systems-level analysis of a modern social fault line. And to do that, we're diving deep into political philosopher Michael J. Sandel's really insightful critique, The Tyranny of Merit, What's Become of the Common Good.
And this isn't just another conversation about economic inequality. It's about something I think far more insidious.
Yeah, that's the central question, right?
Yeah.
How did meritocracy, an ideal that was once seen as fair, as liberating, the very engine of the American dream, how did it become, in Sandel's view, a profound source of deep resentment, intense political division, and a kind of moral hollowness that is fracturing our civic life?
Our mission in this deep dive is precisely to analyze that moral and institutional architecture that Sandel describes. We have to treat this as a systems analysis to really get at the why behind today's societal chasms.
So not just the symptoms, but the machine itself.
Exactly. We need to focus on how the meritocratic ideal, especially when you take it to its extreme, shapes not just the opportunities available, but the moral psychology of both the winners and, crucially, the losers. The crisis we face, as Sandel really illuminates, is fundamentally a crisis of social esteem and dignity.
Okay, so to truly grasp the urgency of Sandel's argument, we need to place him and this book in context. I mean, he's a renowned Harvard political philosopher, but he's writing this book during a time of just extraordinary volatility.
Right. You've got the populist uprisings of the mid-2010s, deep economic and cultural divisions, and then the moment the world just stopped in 2020.
The timing is so crucial. Sandel actually points out that the book was completed right as the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the globe.
And he frames the pandemic as this ultimate litmus test for the state of our society. And, well, we failed it.
How so, though? What was the failure?
Because the pandemic immediately threw a spotlight on all these national vulnerabilities. We lacked essential goods, we were totally dependent on global supply chains for crucial medical supplies, and suddenly we had to rely on the essential, often very low-paid working class.
The grocery clerks, the delivery drivers, the sanitation workers.
The very people the meritocratic system so often discounts or looks down on.
Right. So that sudden political slogan, "We are all in this together," it just rang immediately hollow.
Completely. It was undermined by decades of economic policy that had systematically increased inequality and, just as importantly, eroded social trust.
The crisis exposed this mutual dependence we usually ignore, but the political response, social distancing, lockdowns, it expressed that solidarity through separation, which just reinforced the divides that were already there.
And Sandel traces this hollowness right back to the market-driven globalization project of the previous decades.
Yeah.
This project, pushed by mainstream parties, center-left and center-right.
It was supposed to create wealth for all, right?
Yeah.
That was the promise.
That was the promise. But at the same time, it deprived a huge segment of the working population of well-paying jobs, stable communities, and this is the critical part, social esteem.
So the winners of that globalization project, they just pulled away from the losers.
Not just economically, but geographically. They practiced their own kind of social distancing that long predated the pandemic. And they internalized this belief that their success was entirely earned, which meant they had fewer obligations to those less successful.
And they often misdiagnosed the backlash, didn't they? They saw the resistance as, just being closed-minded.
Exactly. They framed it as a simple clash between open versus closed, implying that if you resisted outsourcing or free trade, you were just tribal or stuck in the past.
And that misdiagnosis is just key to understanding the populist backlash, the one that resulted in things like Brexit in the UK and the election of Donald Trump in the US.
Yeah, Sandel argues that the governing elites consistently failed to grasp the depth of the grievance. They saw it either as simple economic anxiety, just wages and jobs, or as pure animus against diversity.
When in fact, the grievances were so much deeper than a quarterly earnings report.
They are fundamentally about social esteem and dignity. The sense that your contributions are no longer valued, that your community is being dismantled, and that your way of life is disrespected by the people in power.
So Sandel claims that failure of the governing elites lies in how they conceived and carried out globalization. And he says it was marked by two sort of structural failures. The first one was a technocratic view of politics.
Let's break that down. A technocratic failure means elevating markets and experts above moral debate.
So you treat these complex, really contested questions like climate policy or trade deals as if they're just neutral matters of efficiency.
Right. It completely drains public discourse of the necessary and often messy moral arguments about justice, fairness, and the common good. It becomes a spreadsheet problem, not a people problem.
And the second failure, which is really the heart of the book, is the rigid meritocratic definition of winners and losers.
This is the engine of the entire system, Sandel critiques. The core claim isn't just that the system is economically unfair, though. I mean, it is.
Right.
It's that the meritocratic ideal fundamentally shapes how people see themselves and how they see each other. If you truly internalize the idea that those who land on top earned their success solely through their own talent and hard work, it generates a profound and I would say corrupting hubris among the winners.
And for everyone else.
hmm
The vast majority who are left behind struggling with stagnant wages or job loss.
For them, it fuels humiliation and a really deep resentment. They aren't just facing economic hardship, they're facing a moral verdict on their personal worth.
So Sandel is showing us that the toxicity in our politics is a direct, predictable byproduct of a moral narrative.
A narrative that tells the winners they deserve their success and simultaneously tells the losers they deserve their fate because they simply didn't work hard enough, weren't smart enough, or didn't get the right credentials.
Okay, let's unpack that moral narrative, starting with what Sandel calls the rhetoric of rising. This is that, ubiquitous political language. This bipartisan insistence on the mantra that those who work hard and play by the rules should be able to rise as far as their talents will take them.
It's the secular liturgy of American politics. I mean, we heard it from Reagan, we heard it from Clinton.
And famously, Barack Obama used variations of that core slogan over 140 times during his presidency.
And it sounds so good, right? It sounds inherently American, a promise of opportunity.
But what Sandel highlights is the profound irony behind its usage. This rhetoric became most fervent, most celebratory, exactly when economic mobility was stalling and inequality was just exploding.
Precisely. In the 40 years leading up to the book's publication, the median income for working-age men basically stagnated in real terms, and the gaps between the highly educated and everyone else widened into these huge chasms.
Yet politicians didn't acknowledge this failure. Instead, they just doubled down on the celebratory rhetoric.
So the rhetoric shifted. It went from being an ideal we aspire to, we must create a system where you can rise.
Into a congratulatory assertion. Here in America, everyone who works hard can rise, and if you haven't, well, that's on you.
That shift from aspiration to congratulation is the mechanism. That's what rationalizes inequality. It validates meritocratic hubris.
The belief that my success is all mine.
Yes. If I truly believe I earned my success, my $10 million bonus, my position of power, entirely through my own sweat, my own intellect, then my success is entirely my own doing. It's completely divorced from structural luck or fate or the societal grace that allowed my talents to flourish in the first place.
There's a kind of moral self-congratulation, and the book gives some powerful, even shocking anecdotes of this, especially after the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about the aftermath of the Wall Street bailout. Taxpayers essentially saved the entire financial system from collapse.
You would expect some humility.
You would. But when outrage mounted over continued lavish bonuses, the bankers defending themselves did not express humility or gratitude at all.
Instead, they insisted on their moral deservingness. We all remember Lloyd Blankfein, who was then the CEO of Goldman Sachs, responding to public criticism by famously claiming he and his colleagues were doing God's work.
That is the ultimate secular meritocratic version of providential thinking. It takes extreme market success and just conflates it with moral virtue and divine mandate.
The implication is, not only are we smart enough to do this job, but our success is actual evidence of our moral superiority.
They genuinely seem to believe that the financial system they nearly destroyed was being saved by their unique earned talents, and that justified their wealth even as the rest of the economy was just cratering.
It sounds much more like a restoration of an aristocracy of talent rather than a true meritocracy.
The sense of indebtedness to the community that fostered their success is completely absent.
And that brings us right to the flip side, the moralization of failure. Because if success is entirely earned merit, then logically,
And failure, or lack of status, or low income must be entirely a personal fault, a lack of effort. There's no room for systemic failure or just plain bad luck.
Sandel draws a fascinating parallel here to older religious ideas, what he calls a kind of cosmic meritocracy.
The idea that in a strictly just universe, suffering was often seen as proof of wrongdoing. God rewarded the good and punished the sinful.
And the contemporary secular version just replaces God with the market.
The market and the educational system, they become the ultimate arbiters of your worth. The system, like a harsh God, rewards virtue, which it defines as talent and effort, and it punishes failure, which is seen as a lack of credentials or poor market value.
And this harsh logic is most visible in how we talk about public goods, especially health.
Yeah, the book provides a deeply unsettling example related to the debate over healthcare reform, and it shows just how quickly meritocratic logic becomes punitive public policy.
Right. During the debate over replacing Obamacare, a conservative politician, Representative Mo Brooks, argued passionately for a system that would require people with pre-existing conditions to pay more.
And his justification was rooted entirely in this idea of desert, of deservingness.
He explicitly argued this was a virtue because it would reward those who lead good lives, they're healthy, they've done the things to keep their bodies healthy.
That just encapsulates meritocracy at its most unforgiving. It takes the idea that health outcomes are purely a result of individual choice, diet, exercise, smoking, and it transforms them into moral verdicts.
So if you fall ill, you're blameworthy. You deserve higher premiums because you failed to maintain your body, which is interpreted as a moral failing,
Yeah.
a lack of effort.
It's the ultimate expression of the no one to blame but yourself narrative. This thinking, whether it's applied to financial success or physical health, it prompts the successful to look down on victims of misfortune as morally inadequate, rather than simply unlucky or structurally disadvantaged.
It just strips away that shared understanding that we're all vulnerable to fate and circumstance.
And this profound moral judgment that those without credentials or wealth are simply inadequate, it hits hardest at the value of non-credentialed work.
This is where the populist complaint is really rooted, isn't it? A loss of recognition and social esteem, not just a smaller paycheck.
Exactly. Sandel points out that work serves two critical functions. It is, of course, economic, a way of making a living, but critically, it's also cultural, a source of social recognition, dignity, and esteem.
So when globalization meant factory jobs were outsourced and the economy financialized, working people didn't just lose stable income.
They felt society itself accorded less respect to the kind of work they did. The injury is profound because it's inflicted upon their status as producers, as citizens who contribute something essential to the common good.
If the only work society truly values and rewards is highly credentialed, specialized, white-collar work, then all other necessary labor,
Manufacturing, logistics, care work.
it's all implicitly defined as less respectable.
And we can see the devastating human consequences of this loss of esteem, coupled with economic stagnation, in the data on deaths of despair.
That term, from economists Ann Case and Angus Deaton, it refers to the rising mortality rates from suicide, drug overdose, and alcoholic liver disease.
The data paints a terrifying picture of moral collapse in certain demographics. The increase in these deaths is concentrated almost entirely among white, middle-aged Americans without a bachelor's degree.
So while death rates for college graduates have declined significantly since the 1990s,
They have risen for those without a college degree.
the disparity is just staggering. Today, the risk of dying in middle age for the undegreed is 4 times higher than it is for college graduates.
This is not a simple economic downturn. Case and Dean concluded that these deaths reflect a long-term and slowly unfolding loss of a way of life for the white, less educated working class.
They're struggling not just with material deprivation, but with a sense of futility, a damaged morale.
And the feeling that they are no longer seen or honored in a society that just fetishizes credentials and upward mobility. They were told they could make it if they tried hard, but the system moved the goalposts, making their hard work invisible or, just irrelevant.
Which leads us directly to the institution that has become the central arbiter of merit in modern society.
Yeah.
The hyper-competitive university system.
Right. Sandel describes this as less a place of learning and more a moral sorting machine.
We have to remember the historical origins of this system, though. The modern competitive system of elite college admissions was intentionally designed to be meritocratic.
It was championed by figures like James Bryant Conant, the president of Harvard back in the 1940s. He sought a meritocratic coup d'etat.
He wanted to replace the old aristocracy of birth, where admission was based on pedigree, wealth, connections, with an aristocracy of talent.
Supposedly measured by instruments like the SAT, his goal was to identify the most talented and virtuous and equip them to govern regardless of their background. A noble goal, in theory.
But the irony is that this system, which was designed to promote mobility, became the ultimate mechanism for cementing status.
The intense focus on competitive admission made education's civic purpose to cultivate critical thinking and engage citizenship secondary to its sorting function. And that function is to credential winners for the market.
And the numbers just confirm its failure to promote true mobility, despite the idea that attending a prestigious school is the ultimate engine of upward mobility.
The studies by economists like Raj Chetty and his colleagues show that elite colleges enroll so few students from truly disadvantaged backgrounds that their overall impact on economic mobility is, well, minimal.
I think there was a specific data point. Only 1.8% of Harvard students rise from the bottom income quintile to the top quintile.
Exactly. These institutions are overwhelmingly populated by the already affluent, the already successful. They are not pathways for the poor, they are status reinforcers for the rich.
It's a vicious cycle. The highly competitive admissions process entrenches privilege because wealthy applicants benefit from everything from legacy admissions to private test prep.
While at the same time inflicting a massive emotional cost on the students who do manage to win this credentialing race.
Right, the credentialed trauma, the mental health epidemic plaguing affluent, high-achieving youth.
They're navigating this unrelenting pressure cooker of perfectionism. Psychologists have documented high rates of depression, anxiety, and this really fragile self-worth, where their value is entirely contingent on maintaining peak performance.
Sandel says they emerge from this battlefield triumphant but wounded.
Their entire identity is just wrapped up in external validation and performance metrics. They understand their education not as a journey of exploration, but as securing the necessary credential to define their worth in the marketplace.
So the system cultivates ambition.
But often at the expense of authentic self-reflection or any kind of real civic awareness.
The third major architecture of failure, then, is political, technocratic governance.
Right. This is the faith that experts, economists, and efficiency models can solve political problems. And what that does is it drains public discourse of the necessary moral debate about how society should be arranged.
Because if the only question is, what is the most efficient way to achieve X, and not, is X just or fair, then citizens feel disempowered.
They sense that major consequential decisions are being made somewhere else, by central banks, corporate lobbyists, and administrative agencies, all speaking a language, a specialized jargon that excludes ordinary citizens.
And this is where the political rhetoric comes in. Sandel notes a shift in the preferred evaluative contrast used by elites, instead of arguing in terms of just versus unjust.
The political discussion revolved around smart versus dumb.
It's subtle, but it's devastating. Both President Clinton and President Obama frequently used this rhetorical pick, arguing that their favored policy was not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do.
That phrase essentially says, the moral argument is secondary, the economic or technocratic justification is what truly matters.
And when political leaders, who are themselves highly credentialed, frame opposition as merely dumb or uniformed,
they implicitly validate the idea that political competence is tied directly to educational achievement.
and this technocratic system is run almost exclusively by the credentialed. Sandel points out the striking diploma divide in government. Today, Congress is virtually 100% college-educated.
Which is wild when you think that roughly 2/3 of American adults do not hold a college degree. So you have the credentialed few governing the uncredentialed many.
And that's a dramatic shift from historical norms. A century ago, it was common for political parties to be represented by people from all walks of life: union leaders, factory workers, small business owners.
That absence of non-credentialed voices in government reinforces the sense among ordinary citizens that they are not competent to participate in governing, that their lived experience is irrelevant to high-level policy.
And that exclusion is a major engine fueling the populist anger against technocratic elites who often appear to be looking down on them.
Okay, so let's stop and synthesize this. If we view meritocracy as this massive, self-sustaining machine, we need to map its moving parts, its inputs, and its toxic outputs.
We've identified the actors, but how do they all interact?
The machine's goal isn't necessarily fairness, it's legitimacy. It needs a moral system that justifies vast inequality. And the central narrative that feeds the machine is that simple phrase, "You earned it."
And the key drivers are who? Universities are the credential gatekeepers, defining who has access.
Right. And policymakers from the establishment center, both left and right, are the engineers. They reinforce the idea that education is the only solution to inequality.
And then the market acts as the great definer of value. Even though its valuations, like high finance, are often morally suspect, the meritocratic narrative makes people feel their market value reflects their moral worth.
Mm-hmm. And that narrative, you earned it, is intertwined with the structural policy shifts that impose what Sandel calls the hard side of responsibility.
Like welfare reform, the shift from pensions to 401ks, the deregulation of labor markets.
All of this shifted risks from institutions like the government or companies onto the individual.
So the message became, if you lose your job, if your retirement fund fails, or if you fall ill, you have no one to blame but yourself.
It's an ideological reinforcement that makes the individual bear the moral and economic weight of what are often structural failures.
And this creates the core feedback loop of the meritocratic machine.
Exactly. Step one, success in the competitive meritocracy leads immediately to moral credit. Step two, that moral credit breeds meritocratic hubris. And hubris, in turn, generates the system's most toxic byproduct, credentialist prejudice.
Credentialist prejudice.
Yeah.
The pervasive, subtle, or overt habit among elites of looking down on the non-credentialed. This is the most corrosive element.
Yeah, it's the engine of the political divide. And we saw this arrogance weaponized in real time.
The example of Brett Kavanaugh during his 2018 Supreme Court confirmation hearing is textbook.
Right. When he's facing these deeply serious sexual assault accusations, a matter that requires profound moral and judicial introspection, his chosen defense included this oddly incongruous appeal to his credentials.
He invoked his elite background, Yale College and Yale Law School, insisting he had busted my tail to get there.
The credentials were used as an all-purpose rhetoric of credibility. They were functioning as a kind of moral shield. The implication was, how could a person with such impeccable hard-earned credentials, a person who has passed all the meritocratic tests, be capable of such immoral acts?
It suggests that having the diploma somehow inherently validates your character and your truthfulness.
It makes you realize how deeply ingrained that sense of entitlement is. If the credential is your shield, what happens when you're forced to face a moral reckoning without it?
Exactly. And the people watching this, especially those without a degree, they perceive this condescension, this exclusion, and sense that elites look down on them, even if they've worked hard their whole lives.
That is the direct trigger for populist resentment. The complaint isn't necessarily against the idea of rewarding effort. It's against the meritocratic elite who preach opportunity while implementing systems like globalization that leave others behind and then simultaneously judging them as deficient or dumb for not rising to the top.
So the system is structurally sound for its purpose. It successfully sorts people. It embeds a moral judgment of deservingness into that sorting, and then it creates this toxic political environment fueled by the hubris of the winners and the humiliation of the losers.
It's a self-reinforcing moral system that actively undermines the solidarity you need for a functioning democracy.
The most visible current implication of this system's failure is the dramatic diploma divide in politics. We are seeing political polarization along educational lines that represents a complete reversal of historic class-based voting patterns.
The political map is now drawn not by income class, but by educational attainment. In the 2016 election, Donald Trump won 2/3 of white voters without a college degree. That's a dramatic shift of the white working class from the Democratic to the Republican column.
And conversely, Hillary Clinton won decisively among voters with advanced degrees.
For the first time in modern American history, educational attainment became a stronger predictor of political alignment than income itself. Parties that once represented blue-collar workers, like the Democrats, increasingly represent meritocratic, intellectual, and professional elites in the major coastal cities.
This educational realignment confirms Sandel's insight that systemic resentment is not irrational.
No, it's a predictable, very human response to a system that relentlessly promises upward mobility. You can make it if you try, but delivers stagnant wages and constant social disrespect.
And at the same time, tells people their troubles are solely due to their inadequate education.
Right. When you feel you've submitted to the discipline of the system, you've worked hard, you've played by the rules, but you've been left behind. And then the elites who benefited tell you the answer is simply to get a better education or that your troubles are your own fault.
The result is this profound anger and the feeling of being, as one author put it, a stranger in your own land.
Populist anger, in this sense, is highly rational because it is a protest against meritocratic condescension. It is an attempt to restore dignity to the non-credentialed life.
And this political breakdown contributes directly to the crisis of the common good. Sandel argues that when politics becomes entirely technocratic, focused only on GDP growth, efficiency, and individual consumer satisfaction, it simply cannot address the fundamental moral questions needed for a shared civic identity.
You neglect the core questions. What do we owe each other as citizens? What genuinely constitutes the dignity of work?
And the inability to have this shared civic conversation is nowhere clearer than in the modern debate over climate change.
Hmm. The technocratic hope, often expressed by environmental and political elites, is that polarization on climate change is just due to people denying facts or lacking information.
The idea that if we just deliver the science clearly, people will agree on the policy solution.
But the studies show the exact opposite is true, which just fundamentally refutes the technocratic ideal. Political polarization on climate change actually increases with education and scientific literacy.
Wait, say that again. It increases.
Yes. Among Republicans who are college graduates, a higher percentage believe global warming is exaggerated compared to those with only a high school education. And for Democrats, higher education correlates with stronger belief in climate change.
So the partisan gap is almost twice as large among those with college degrees as among those with less education.
Which means the divide is not about information scarcity or dumb denial. It's about political identity, values, and trust in the messengers, the technocratic elites.
So the core belief that agreement on facts leads to reasoned policy consensus is fundamentally flawed.
It's flawed because the meritocratic system has undermined the shared moral ground necessary for citizens to trust one another or their governing class.
The genius of Sandel's analysis is how he takes this highly individualistic ethic of self-help and just flips it, forcing us to look at the entire system that distributes power, prestige, and moral worth.
It forces us to move beyond individual blame and recognize the profound role of luck, fate, and societal structure. Sandel, following philosophers like John Rawls, reminds us that the sheer fact of having a talent that is valued by the market, whether you're a top neurosurgeon or an NBA star, is simply a matter of good fortune.
It's not something you morally earned or deserve, even if you put in the effort.
And this is a really radical philosophical challenge to the meritocratic premise. Meritocrats are generally fine with taxing inherited wealth, arguing, you didn't earn that.
Right. But they draw a hard line, insisting that we do deserve the rewards that flow from our talent and effort.
But Sandel argues that even our talents themselves are morally arbitrary. If you happen to be a brilliant architect in 14th century Venice, you would be valued and compensated accordingly. If you were born with the exact same brain today, you might be a software developer.
The market value of that talent is entirely contingent on what society happens to prize at that specific historical moment.
And you didn't earn the moment, or the societal demand for your skill.
This realization leads to the critical distinction between fairness and dignity. The limited goal of the current system is merely fair competition, equality of opportunity.
Right. But Sandel argues that even if we had a perfect meritocracy where everyone started on a perfectly level playing field, it would still not be a good society.
Why not?
Because it would generate the same hubris among the winners and the same moral judgment against the losers.
So we need to aim for a broader equality of condition and, most importantly, the dignity of labor.
A good society requires recognizing the worth of all necessary work, not just compensating market value. And this is a profound ethical challenge to our current hierarchy.
It brings us back to the insights of figures like Martin Luther King Jr., who really understood the non-economic dimensions of work.
King, speaking to striking sanitation workers in Memphis, noted that the person who picks up our garbage is, in the final analysis, as significant as the physician.
Because every necessary job is a contribution to the common good.
Exactly. And if we fail to acknowledge that intrinsic worth and instead judge jobs based on market value and credential requirements, we are operating under an ethically bankrupt system.
Yet our political system has prioritized one singular pathway to dignity, the hyper-selective 4-year university degree.
And that focus on higher education as the sole engine of mobility has starved crucial supporting institutions. Sandel notes that the U.S. spends less than 0.1% of GDP on active labor market policies like vocational training and job retraining.
Which is less than we spend on prisons.
It's unbelievable. We invest heavily in a system designed to sort the winners, but almost nothing in systems designed to cultivate flourishing in place for those who do not go to elite universities.
The priority should be diffusing intelligence, learning, and civic capacity across all classes and vocations, community colleges, technical training, not making elite universities the single stressful gateway to a dignified life and political participation.
And if we look at this through the lens of systems analysis, Sandel's moral and institutional critique of the meritocratic ideal really complements other contemporary analyses, like those focusing on algorithmic or data-driven power.
How so?
Because both the old academic testing system and new data-driven systems function as sophisticated sorting mechanisms.
So the competitive college admissions process, driven by testing GPA and credentialing, is just an analog sorting system.
An analog sorting system that allocates opportunity and status, and crucially, embeds moral, judgments, worthiness, desert, intelligence into structures that claim to be neutral or efficient. It's all about the sorting.
Whether the sorting mechanism is an algorithm or an admissions committee, the outcome is the same.
The creation of a hierarchy based on perceived desert, which ultimately determines who is respected, who is compensated, and whose voice is even heard in the civic square.
So after this extensive deep dive, we return to the central problem. Why does meritocracy fail? Why does it evolve from an ideal of fairness into this tyranny of moral judgment?
Meritocracy, when you take it to its extreme, becomes ethically unsustainable because it demands that success be viewed as entirely earned and deserved. By providing a moral justification for massive inequality, it encourages the winners to believe their success is solely their own doing.
Which fosters hubris.
And simultaneously inflicts this corrosive humiliation on the vast majority who do not reach the top. This erosion of civic bonds makes genuine solidarity basically impossible.
So the path forward, then, must involve embracing a public philosophy of humility.
I think that's exactly right. We must collectively recognize that our talents are a matter of circumstance and luck, and that we are all profoundly indebted to the community that cultivated those talents through public funding, shared infrastructure, and stable institutions.
That humility is essential for renewing the common good. It shifts the question from, how can we perfectly sort the talented to the top? To what?
To how can we cultivate the common good such that all necessary work provides a basis for dignity and flourishing?
This means we have to fundamentally rethink success itself. The rhetoric of rising focuses entirely on upward mobility, on achieving escape from one's class or background, as the only definition of a fulfilling life.
But a healthy democratic society has to enable flourishing in place for the majority of citizens who will not climb to the top of the income ladder. It requires recognizing the intrinsic worth of every citizen's contribution, regardless of its market value.
Sandel's exploration shows us that a society obsessed with credentialing, market efficiency, and individual desert will always fail to cultivate the shared civic identity democracy needs. The core fault is moral, and it's baked right into the system of social recognition. So, since we know democracy requires citizens to encounter one another across class, race, and faith, how must we fundamentally rethink what constitutes success and who deserves respect to truly repair our polarized civic life? If we stop believing that success is a sign of virtue, what moral framework must we construct to ensure every person finds dignity and recognition in their necessary contribution? That is the profound, urgent question this deep dive leaves us with.
That wraps up our deep dive into Michael J. Sandel's The Tyranny of Merit: What's Become of the Common Good. We invite you to reflect on how these meritocratic narratives shape your own everyday judgments about success and failure, effort, and luck. What parts of your life do you claim solely as earned without acknowledging the role of fortune?
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next. Thank you for joining us on Crisis in Perception.